Hello and welcome to the Mutual Fund Show. My name is Neeraj Shah. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll discuss a very important piece that has puzzled a lot of you. So many of you have written to me individually on Twitter, on Facebook about why is it that the funds that you bought because they were rated so highly, eventually not yielding results. Now, is there merit in trying to figure out a methodology that might be suitable for predicting the right kind of funds to buy into? Is there a metric which might be better for investors to follow? And mind you, if you go back in history over the last couple of years on the Mutual Fund Show platform, you will see two or three CEOs of AMCs saying that instead of looking at point-to-point returns, why don't investors look at rolling returns? Because they are a more effective way of analyzing the fund's performances. Sunil Subramaniam, for example, of Sundaram MF, has spoken about this. Ashish Somaya, currently with White Howard, previously with Motilal Oswal, has spoken about this. So rolling returns seems to be a concept that might actually do the trick for an average investor. The idea of today's discussion with Sunil Javeri of MSJ Mr. Bond is to try and figure out, very briefly of course, the rolling return concept and what that does in terms of effective rankings, if at all. And then is there a derivative or a variation or a variant of the rolling returns methodology that could actually improve upon that metric as well? Let's get him in the conversation. Sunil, good having you. Thanks for joining in. Can you briefly, Sunil, first tell, of course, I hope all is safe, because I saw on Twitter that you were impacted by the deadly sea. So I hope things are better now. But can you briefly, Sunil, touch wood, God is kind. Sunil, can you briefly tell us what is the rolling returns methodology?
So first and foremost, I've been an advocate of a rolling returns analysis for a very long time, because point-to-point return is nothing but a postmortem of the recent past performance, which could have been impacted based on the events which were recent events. Now, just to give you an example, when the markets crashed by 1,700 points, and if I wanted to just show a different picture to my investor, all I had to do was one day earlier and the point-to-point returns thereafter, which is 6 months, 12 months backwards, would have looked very good. But if I want to show a different picture to my investor, I would have taken that particular day when the markets collapsed and then showcase the returns analysis of last 6 months, 12 months. It's just a one-day difference, which could have changed the point-to-point returns dramatically, and the investors would be absolutely clueless as to what happened. So rolling returns analysis takes into account, so let's assume I want to do a rolling returns from 2010 to 2021 of daily 5-year rolling returns analysis. What it does for the investor is that anytime I've invested from 2010, 1st of April, 2nd of April, 2011, I would have invested in 2012 as a different investor, and so on and so forth. And then thereafter held it for 5 years. So all the observations which would have been, which would have completed 5-year period from 2010 to 2021, all would be captured. So the good, bad and ugly of every observation which has completed 5 years in an equity analysis is the right way of taking into account while selecting a scheme. So your question, your introduction was, how do you select a scheme? And investors are baffled as to why is the ranking going up and down, and all of a sudden a 5-star rated fund comes down to 1-star rated, and so on and so forth.
Can you tell us what would the point be? I mean, for example, let's assume that I bought a fund in 2012. What would the difference be between a 5-year rolling return and a 5-year point-to-point return? Or let's say I bought a fund exactly 5 years back from today. Why would that rolling return analysis give me a better verdict than a point-to-point return analysis?
Sure. So let's take an example of 2008 and 2009. If I were to do a point-to-point returns analysis on January 1, 2008 and 5 years back point-to-point returns, it would have looked stupendous in terms of the returns analysis. And naturally, based on that, somebody would have selected a fund, which is unfortunately become a norm rather than an exception, to select based on the past performance. The same fund 1 year later in 2009 March, if I would have selected, the returns would have looked dismal based on the 5-year returns analysis post 31st March and earlier than that. As against that, if I would have done a 5-year rolling returns analysis of the same scheme, it would have captured this period also and beyond that also. So it would have been, let's assume that minimum return was say 5% or a negative 5%, which happened on 1st of January 31st March 2009, when markets collapsed by 60%. It would have captured that as a minimum return also. And the rolling returns analysis will throw up two more numbers, the maximum returns and the average returns also. And on top of that, standard deviation. See, investors are looking to have consistently good performance, but at the same time, they want to have a consistently smoother investment journey that can be only through the standard deviation matrix.
Okay. Well, let's try and figure this out. So, I mean, this is the data that we are showing, or the data that is being shown out here, is for a period of 2010 to 31/3/2013, if I'm not wrong, and that shows the rolling returns, the average return. Sunil, I believe the average return on this slide is the rolling return per scheme, right?
Absolutely, 5-year rolling return. Anytime during this period, if you would have invested and held it for 5 years, that means my last observation will be somewhere in 2018. That is 31st March 2013 and 5 years thereafter.
Got it. Okay. So the average return, rolling return, would have been these numbers. Now, on the basis of that, I think if you can just stick to that plate, on the basis of that, I think the points with weightage is probably, let's assume, the rank being given to any of these funds. But Sunil, what you are saying is that if we actually use standard deviation as a methodology in addition to rolling returns, then that might give a slightly different picture, which might be better. Why is it that you say that?
Absolutely. So these are the two methodologies which we are going to be introducing in the market for the first time. The first one, points with weightage, is nothing but consistently high performance and high returns over this 5-year rolling returns analysis, and that also in the higher returns band. What do I mean by higher returns band? The returns band will be 0 to 5%, or less than 0 is negative observations also, 5 to 10%, 10 to 15%, and so on and so forth. So that means consistently Mirai has been delivering very high returns, and that also in higher returns band at the same time. So that is one way of giving a ranking, and that's what you are seeing, that 1 number, 10 number, 9 number, 7 number, and 4 number in terms of the ranking. But more important from investors' point of view, so this is what I call investor returns expectations, which is the high returns, investor high return score, IHR is what I'm calling it. But if you want to have investor experience score, which is how volatile has been the journey while delivering these high returns, as you can see, number 7 of Edelweiss comes down to number 2. That means Edelweiss has done phenomenally well in terms of giving investors a smoother journey, at the same time consistently delivering high returns in the top 10 schemes of the large cap space. Is this entire chart is on large cap space. As against that, Mirai was number 1 consistently in terms of the high returns in higher returns band, but in terms of volatility, it is number 4. So which is also extremely good, because if you are in the top 5, that's what you should be looking for as an investor. Rather than a point-to-point returns analysis, this methodology which we will introduce will get transparency as far as the rankings are concerned.
Okay. Now, Sunil, 2 questions. I'm actually going a bit back. Where does an investor, an average investor, get these rolling returns? Are they easily available? Has it to be calculated? Under the current scheme of things, from the publicly available, freely available resources, where can I get rolling returns?
Generally, it's not available so easily. Either you have to ask the mutual fund house, or our platform has a rolling returns calculator also, but that is only through subscription by the advisors, the mutual fund distribution community, not available to the B2C, the investor segment so far.
Okay, so it is not it's not freely available. So a DIY investor may not be able to get rolling returns that easily unless she or he writes to the fund house for a history of the rolling returns, right?
Absolutely. And that's what they should be insisting on in terms of one of the data points.
Okay. Now, Sunil, I have a follow-up question. The slides that the data that you've calculated, I'm sure this is basic rolling returns data. It's not something that is something that I think you get. So what I'm trying to say is out here, viewers, that if you looked at that plate, the return numbers that are being mentioned there would be the same if you would write to the fund house and ask for the returns for this particular period. So keep that in mind. Now, the point I'm trying to make out here, Sunil, rather trying to get from you out here, is that when you are saying that if we deduct, or rather if we divide the returns by standard deviation, it makes the returns of the fund that much less volatile. We are effectively trying to say that over a period of time, the investor would probably make the same returns that a fund is giving. But if it is divided by the standard deviation, it will make the annual exercise a lot more easy breathing, if you will, because the investor will not see the portfolio really jumping up and down too much year after year.
So let me explain to you in a different manner and a different language. Let's assume that there are two schemes, both have delivered 12% average returns. But that average returns hide the fact that there will be minimum returns and there will be maximum returns. And then that's what gives you the average returns of all the observations put together. One of the schemes may have a negative 10% minimum and maximum of 30%, but still come to 12% return. The other scheme may be 5% positive minimum return and maybe 20% positive on the maximum side, but the average is 12%. So the person who's not delivered negative return, the scheme which has not delivered negative returns, their investors will be far, their exercise and their experience of investing in that scheme would have been far better than the one who would have delivered negative 10% and a positive maximum return of 30%. So that's what we are trying to get at. The investor experience is more important because when markets collapse like March 2020 or March 2009 and so on and so forth, that's the time when most investors go outside the market, go back to the traditional avenues like fixed deposits, etc. And they don't come back to equity as an asset class or mutual fund as a vehicle also. This is where we are trying to get the mind share of the investors, the AMCs and the mutual fund distributors also by saying, please adopt and embrace rolling returns analysis. And what you saw in terms of the ranking, so we have created a calculator for the ranking. Automatically, it gives the ranking by giving observations. So there will be, say, 1,000 observations of which has completed 5 years during this period. Just for an example, every observation has a returns of negative 5%, 5% positive, 10%, so and so forth. All the observations are given weightage. And higher the returns band, higher the weightage, lower the returns band, lower the weightage. That's how we arrive at that ranking of 1, 2, 5, etc. And then thereafter, that number which we arrive at and divide that by standard deviation is what the investor experience score is, what we are talking about now.
Sure, but I'm presuming, Sunil, that the ranking is something that if an individual investor were to go and do this exercise, as difficult as it is for even one fund, but for doing 10 funds would be nearly impossible. But let's assume I'm choosing one fund and I'm getting the numbers from the AMC. Then the ranking that you're talking about, not the one divided by standard deviation, but the basic ranking would essentially come out to be the same if the investor is calculating the numbers herself or himself, right?
No. They will not come to know the ranking at all. By analyzing rolling returns on its own, they will not be able to come to know the ranking at all. There is a methodology which is happening inside that calculator which is creating this. As I told you, we are giving weightage to 1,000 observations. And that also weighted in terms of the returns band also. And thereafter the rankings are calculated. It's a very complicated process. Individually, you will not be able to come to know at all about the ranking. But more importantly,
Sure. No, please carry on. Most importantly?
No, so more importantly, investors are confused. So one ranking company is giving 1 star to one particular scheme, whereas the other ranking company is giving 4 star to the same scheme. Now, who to
Sure.
believe and what is the methodology behind that is it's not so transparent. But as far as we are
Got
concerned,
it.
it will be so transparent because we are giving
Sure.
you the rationale behind it also.
Okay, Sunil, can I request you before we wrap this up? What is an average retail investor supposed to do? Let's assume the retail investor is not going out and subscribing to any of the rankings or to this methodology because it's subscription based. How does one use rolling returns to his or her advantage in choosing funds? Because let's assume that for a moment's sake that an average investor will not get the gold standard when it comes to choosing funds, but
Right.
let's try and ensure at least via this show that the average investor does not get the bitter end of the stick. How can one use rolling returns to his or her advantage?
Sure. So what
Basics.
the rolling returns? Yeah, basics. I'll tell you what the rolling returns analysis throws up as a summary is the minimum return, the maximum return, average return, standard deviation, and the returns bands in which returns bands 0 to 5, 5 to 10, etc. So what the investor should be looking for is the lower standard deviation, like let's assume and the average returns. These are the two important criteria for you to select. One is the average returns. If the average returns are similar across board, let's assume 13, 14, 15%, nothing much to choose from on a 5-year rolling basis between three schemes. But the lower the standard deviation, which is the denominator, the better will be the ranking for that the scheme, and that will be the investment where the investor will have a much better experience in terms of getting consistently good returns at the same time at a lower volatility.
Got it. Okay. Sunil, one final question from amongst choose any category, and I'm not asking you to make a recommendation out here because your recommended list or set of funds to your clients may be different. But from the studies that you have done, the most recent count of rankings plus the low volatility that you would have given out, choose a category, any particular category. Let's say flexi cap funds or large cap funds.
Let's take a large cap because I've done some
large cap funds. Okay, sure, large caps. Tell us about a couple of funds which have performed really well on the ranking front, and at the same time, the standard deviation factor also makes them look attractive. Which are these? I repeat, they may not be recommendations, and which is
I'm not saying they're recommendations. What I'm saying is the Mirai large cap, Axis blue chip, Edelweiss large cap. They have all made the cut as far as I'm concerned, both on consistently high returns and consistently high returns adjusted for volatility.
Okay. Sunil, my last question to you. Is there a way in which the investors can use this methodology to either eliminate funds or narrow down on funds? You mentioned that look at lower standard deviation, etc. So that's there. Aside of that, is there something else which is a thing that people should keep in mind?
Sure. So, it's very difficult for people to judge as to when the 5-star rating will become 1-star, unfortunately.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden, 5-star rated become 1-star, and then, investors are at a loss as to what happened and what hit them. As against that, our ranking methodology will also talk about the red flags and the green flags. The red flags will say that this particular scheme should be put on watch list, and if it continues to have a higher standard deviation ranking is on the number is higher, means it goes beyond 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, it comes into the red flag. You please keep a watch on it on a month-on-month basis. At some point in time, we have realized that they will fall out of the top 10 also. So that gives you an idea as to which are the schemes which may not do well in future because the volatility has crept into that scheme. And there will be green flags also, where you may not be consistently high in terms of the returns, but the standard deviation based ranking, they are coming up the ladder. So they may be, say, 12 on the consistently high returns ranking, but they may be 2 or 3 or 4 in consistently high returns adjusted for standard deviation. And we keep that as a positive watch list. And some point in time in future, I have realized that they come into the top 10 on both the rankings
Got it. Okay, Sunil, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for taking the time out and giving us some sense of what arguably very helpful to investors.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show.
Thanks, Sunil, for being there, and stay safe. And viewers, thanks so much for tuning in to this layer of the Mutual Fund Show.